In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. This iconic tagline encapsulates the brutal, unrelenting nature of the Warhammer 40,000 universe. A galaxy-spanning conflict has raged for millennia, driven by competing ideologies, relentless survival instincts, and the struggle for dominance. The setting is defined by extremes, endless battles, unyielding fanaticism, and a pervasive sense of hopelessness. Yet, amidst this chaotic and dystopian backdrop, one question lingers. Is there any faction within this vast and violent cosmos that can be considered truly morally good? To even attempt answering this question requires untangling a complex web of ethics, survivalism, and subjective morality. The factions of the Warhammer 40,000 universe represent a spectrum of ideologies, from the grim pragmatism of the Imperium of Man to the alien perspectives of the Eldar and the stark nihilism of the Necrons. Each faction operates within a set of rules dictated not only by their cultural history, but also by the harsh realities of survival in a galaxy fraught with danger. For most, moral goodness is not just a luxury, it is often an obstacle to survival. Morality in the Warhammer 40,000 setting is an elusive concept. The universe itself is designed to challenge traditional notions of right and wrong. Actions that might be viewed as abhorrent in our world, genocide, tyranny, or fanaticism, are often justified as necessary evils within the brutal calculus of survival. Empires crumble, entire civilizations are extinguished, and countless lives are sacrificed to stem greater horrors. The result is a grim tapestry where morality exists in shades of gray, and even the noblest intentions can lead to catastrophic consequences. The notion of a morally good faction might seem almost laughable in a setting built on the premise of relentless darkness. However, the question invites a deeper exploration of what morality means in this context. Is it about the preservation of life at any cost? The protection of one's own species? The intent behind actions or the consequences they bring? With so many competing perspectives, the concept of moral goodness becomes a labyrinth of subjectivity. Before diving into the factions themselves, it's important to recognize the scale and scope of this universe. The galaxy of Warhammer 40,000 is unimaginably vast, containing countless star systems, worlds, and species. It is a place where gods are real, fueled by the emotions of sentient beings, and where the warp, a chaotic parallel dimension, constantly threatens to spill into reality, unleashing horrors beyond comprehension. Every decision made by a faction is shaped by this perilous environment, where survival often comes at the expense of compassion. The factions of Warhammer 40,000 are not mere armies or governments. They are reflections of their circumstances. The Imperium of Man, for example, is a stagnant authoritarian regime built on blind faith and brutal efficiency, forged in response to humanity's near extinction. The Tyranids are an all-consuming hive mind, driven by an instinctual need to feed and propagate. The Tau espouse ideals of unity and cooperation, but enforce their vision with uncompromising rigidity. Each faction embodies its own vision of survival, and their actions cannot be understood without considering the harsh realities they face. This exploration of morality will not seek to impose modern ethical standards on a universe so removed from our own. Instead, it will examine the ideologies, actions, and consequences that define each faction. Which of them, if any, can claim to act in a way that aligns with the concept of moral goodness? Can selflessness exist in a world where survival demands cruelty? These questions will guide our journey through the factions, their histories, and their motivations. As we embark on this discussion, it is crucial to remember that Warhammer 40,000 is not a setting that rewards optimism. Its creators designed it as a satirical, hyperbolic reflection of humanity's darkest impulses, exaggerated to cosmic proportions. Yet, even within this dystopian framework, glimmers of heroism, compassion, and altruism occasionally emerge. Whether these moments are enough to redeem an entire faction, or if redemption is even possible, remains to be seen. So, as the curtain rises on this exploration, set aside preconceptions of clear heroes and villains. In the 41st millennium, morality is a battlefield, and survival often trumps all. Still, the question persists. Is there room for goodness in the grim darkness of the far future? Let us delve into the factions, their struggles, and their choices to find an answer. The Warhammer 40,000 universe is a vast and intricate mosaic of factions, each with unique philosophies, goals, and methods of survival. These factions form the key players in the question of moral goodness, their varied perspectives and ideologies shaping their role in the galaxy. Understanding them requires identifying their primary actors and the figures who define their essence. The Imperium of Man stands as one of the most dominant and enduring human civilizations in the galaxy. It is an immense, sprawling empire held together by faith, bureaucracy, and military might. The Emperor of Mankind, a near-mythical figure, is the cornerstone of this regime, revered as a god and symbol of humanity's unity. Beyond the Emperor, individuals such as Saint Celestine, who embodies the miraculous and the divine, and high-ranking officials like Inquisitor Eisenhorn showcase the diverse ways humanity seeks to safeguard its place in a hostile galaxy. Figures like Lord Solar Macarius, renowned for his unparalleled conquests, and Commissar Kane, a reluctant yet celebrated hero, illustrate the balance of duty and personal struggle in the Imperium's endless wars. The Adepta Sororitas, or Sisters of Battle, are a key component of the Imperium, representing unwavering devotion to the Emperor. Figures like Junith Eruita, a formidable and charismatic leader, exemplify the discipline and faith that drive this militant order. Their role is to purge heresy, protect humanity's spiritual purity, and act as a bulwark against chaos and corruption. The Space Marines, genetically enhanced warriors, are the Imperium's elite defenders. Champions such as Dante, the ancient and venerated leader of the Blood Angels, and Marneus Calgar, the stoic master of the Ultramarines, serve as paragons of martial excellence. Each represents the values of their chapter, whether it be duty, honor, or vengeance. These figures are not just warriors, but symbols of humanity's perseverance. Contrasting the Imperium's authoritarian grip is the Tau Empire, a rising force that champions the ideals of unity and progress. The Tau are led by figures like Commander Shadow Sun, a tactical genius and advocate for the greater good. Ethereal leaders like Anva serve as spiritual guides, ensuring cohesion within the Empire. The Tau's vision extends to their allied species, including the Kroot and Vespid, whose own leaders bring diversity to this cooperative yet controlled society. The Eldari, an ancient and once dominant race, bring a tragic perspective to the galaxy's struggles. Their leadership is defined by powerful seers and warriors who seek to preserve their dwindling numbers. Eldrad Ulthran, a visionary Farseer, navigates the tides of fate to secure his people's survival. Figures such as Jane Zar, a Phoenix Lord and masterful warrior, embody the martial traditions of their race. The Harlequins, enigmatic performers of cosmic drama, are led by the mysterious Shadow Seers and Troop Masters who safeguard secrets of the universe. The Drukhari, a darker reflection of their Eldari kin, thrive in cruelty and hedonism. As Drubel Vecht, the cunning and tyrannical overlord of Komara, rules with an iron grip. His subordinates, such as Lelith Hesperax, a peerless gladiator, highlight the brutal artistry that defines this faction. They serve as reminders of the consequences of unrestrained ambition and excess. The Necrons, a race of ancient soulless beings, present a stark contrast to the organic life forms of the galaxy. Figures like Imhotep the Storm Lord, a master tactician, and Trazyn the Infinite, a collector of history and artifacts, reflect the duality of Necron society. While some seek domination, others strive to recover their lost glory or preserve remnants of the galaxy's past. The Tyranids, a relentless hive mind, are devoid of individual personalities. Yet their synaptic creatures serve as their will's extensions. Creatures like the hive tyrants and swarm lords represent the intelligence guiding the swarm's insatiable hunger. Though faceless, their role as an existential threat unites other factions in their fear and resistance. Chaos, a pervasive and corrupting force, manifests through its mortal and immortal servants. Figures like Abaddon the Despoiler, a dark and determined warlord, lead the Chaos Space Marines in their eternal war against the Imperium. Demon princes and greater demons, such as Scarbrand or Kairos Fateweaver, act as avatars of the Chaos Gods, spreading their influence across the galaxy. Their presence underscores the constant temptation and threat of chaos. The Orcs, by contrast, are a primal and anarchic force driven by instinct and an unrelenting love of conflict. War bosses like Gazchkul Thraka exemplify the Orcs' brutal simplicity and unshakable belief in their own strength. Their leaders may lack subtlety, but they possess a charisma and cunning that hold their rambunctious hordes together. The forces of the galaxy also include enigmatic and solitary players such as the Khitan Shards, ancient and godlike beings bound by the Necrons, and the Eldar's Incarn, a harbinger of their potential rebirth. These figures, while not tied to any singular faction, represent unique perspectives on the nature of existence and morality. Each of these factions and their leaders play a distinct role in the galaxy's ongoing drama. Their actions and philosophies will serve as the lens through which the concept of moral goodness is examined. Their stories, entwined with the fates of countless lives, offer a glimpse into the complexity of the Warhammer 40,000 universe and the elusive nature of morality within it. The question of which faction in the Warhammer 40,000 universe can be considered truly morally good arises from the inherent complexities of its dystopian setting. This universe, built on extremes, challenges traditional ideas of morality through its unrelenting conflict, the necessity of survival, and the pervasive threat of annihilation. Identifying moral goodness in this context is neither straightforward nor universally agreed upon, as the galaxy's harsh realities blur the lines between altruism, pragmatism, and outright cruelty. Several core reasons contribute to the difficulty of this evaluation. First, the constant state of war that defines the universe leaves little room for ethical considerations. Every faction operates in an environment where survival depends on force, subjugation, and domination. In this brutal calculus, actions that might appear morally reprehensible, such as the extermination of entire species, are often framed as necessary evils to secure a greater purpose. As a result, even those factions that profess noble intentions are often forced into morally ambiguous or outright destructive actions. Second, morality in Warhammer 40,000 is deeply subjective, shaped by the perspective of the factions themselves. Each faction sees its own ideology as inherently just and its survival as paramount. The Imperium of Man, for example, views its authoritarian rule as essential to preserving humanity, while the Tau Empire champions the greater good as the ultimate ideal. These internally coherent belief systems make it challenging to assess morality from an external, unbiased perspective. What one faction considers virtuous might be viewed as oppressive or hypocritical by another. Another complicating factor is the overwhelming presence of existential threats that force factions to adopt extreme measures. The Tyranids, Chaos, and Orcs represent forces of destruction that cannot be reasoned with or negotiated. In the face of such threats, factions often abandon ethical considerations in favor of survival at any cost. This creates a moral paradox. Does fighting against an unquestionably malevolent force justify acts of equal cruelty? The constant danger of annihilation distorts the moral landscape, making it nearly impossible to distinguish necessity from malice. The scale of the galaxy further muddies the waters. With countless worlds, civilizations, and cultures, the actions of any given faction can vary widely across different regions. A faction that might act as a savior in one instance could be an oppressor in another. The Imperium, for instance, may protect a planet from invasion while simultaneously exploiting its resources or enforcing brutal compliance. These inconsistencies reflect the diverse and decentralized nature of many factions, complicating efforts to paint anyone as entirely good or evil. Moreover, the presence of non-human factions introduces ethical questions that defy human-centric morality. The Aldari, Necrons, and Tau, among others, operate under values and perspectives that are alien to human understanding. Their decisions are often guided by goals that prioritize their own species or ideals over any broader sense of fairness or compassion. Judging these factions by human standards risks oversimplifying the complex motivations that drive them. Religious and ideological zealotry is another factor that obscures moral evaluation. Many factions are driven by unwavering devotion to their beliefs, leaving little room for compromise or reflection. The Imperium's worship of the Emperor, the Chaos faction's devotion to the ruinous powers, and the Tau's adherence to the greater good all represent ideologies that justify actions regardless of their moral implications. This zealotry often blinds factions to the consequences of their actions, allowing atrocities to be rationalized as righteous acts. The influence of external forces, particularly the warp, adds yet another layer of complexity. The warp, a dimension of pure chaos and emotion, corrupts and distorts the intentions of those who interact with it. Even factions that strive for goodness can fall victim to its malevolent influence, leading to actions that betray their ideals. This corrupting force ensures that no faction is entirely immune to moral failings, as even the noblest intentions can be twisted into acts of destruction. Lastly, the cyclical nature of history within the Warhammer 40,000 universe perpetuates a sense of inevitability and despair. Many factions are trapped in cycles of revenge, expansion, or decay, unable to break free from the patterns that define their existence. This creates a moral stagnation, where even the most well-meaning efforts are undermined by the weight of history and the impossibility of lasting change. The absence of hope for a better future often leads factions to embrace pragmatism over principles, further complicating any assessment of moral goodness. In conclusion, the question of which faction can be considered truly morally good is inherently difficult because of the universe's structure and themes. Warhammer 40,000's unrelenting focus on survival, the subjectivity of morality, and the influence of existential threats all combine to create an environment where traditional notions of goodness are overshadowed by necessity and despair. This difficulty is not a flaw, but a deliberate aspect of the setting, designed to provoke thought and debate rather than provide easy answers. Understanding why this question is so challenging sets the stage for a deeper exploration of the factions and their actions. Determining which faction in Warhammer 40,000 can be considered truly morally good requires clear criteria to evaluate their actions and philosophies. In a universe defined by extremes, these criteria must balance intent, methodology, and consequences. Key considerations include the preservation of life, the prioritization of collective welfare over personal or factional gain, the avoidance of unnecessary suffering, and the capacity for selflessness or altruism. Through these lenses, we can examine significant events that highlight the actions and decisions of various factions. The preservation of life serves as a foundational measure of morality. Factions that actively protect life, either their own or that of others, align more closely with moral goodness. However, the challenge lies in separating actions motivated by compassion from those driven by pragmatism or selfish survival. For example, the Imperium of Man often justifies its authoritarian measures as necessary for protecting humanity from extinction, yet its extermination of countless worlds for disobedience undermines this claim. One notable event is the defense of Cadia against Chaos forces, where humanity united in an extraordinary effort to shield the galaxy from destruction. While noble in its intent, the high cost in human lives complicates its moral evaluation. Another criterion is the collective welfare of sentient beings. This encompasses actions aimed at ensuring prosperity, stability, and growth for the largest possible number of individuals. The Tao Empire, for instance, emphasizes the greater good as its guiding principle, integrating multiple species into a unified society. Their expansionist methods, however, often involve coercion or outright subjugation, raising questions about the authenticity of their altruism. The annexation of the planet Nimbosa illustrates this dichotomy. While the Tao introduced advanced technology and infrastructure, their conquest displaced the native population and suppressed resistance. Avoidance of unnecessary suffering is another vital aspect. This evaluates whether factions minimize harm in their actions and strategies. The Eldari, despite their insular focus, often intervene to prevent catastrophic outcomes that could harm the galaxy as a whole. One example is their efforts to seal off the Eye of Terror, a region of space dominated by chaos. While their motives are tied to their own survival, their actions indirectly protect countless other species from warp incursions. However, their manipulative tactics, which often sacrifice other lives for their benefit, complicate their moral standing. Selflessness or altruism, actions taken without expectation of benefit or reward, is perhaps the rarest quality in the galaxy. While most factions are driven by survival or ideology, there are moments when individuals or groups act against their own interests to aid others. The Salamanders, a chapter of the Space Marines, are frequently cited as exemplars of this virtue within the Imperium. They prioritize the protection of civilian lives during military campaigns, often going to great lengths to shield the innocent. Their actions during the defense of Armageddon, where they risked their own forces to evacuate civilian populations, highlight a rare glimmer of altruism in the grimdark setting. Key events also illuminate the ways factions fail to meet these moral benchmarks. Chaos factions, for example, thrive on suffering and destruction, directly opposing any concept of morality tied to preservation or compassion. Their invasions, such as the 13th Black Crusade, showcase unrelenting carnage with no consideration for the well-being of others. Similarly, the Orcs, while arguably innocent in their unrelenting desire for conflict, spread devastation wherever they go, driven by instinct rather than ideology. The Tyranids and Necrons present unique challenges to moral evaluation. The Tyranids, as a hive mind, lack individual will and act purely on biological imperative. Their consumption of entire ecosystems eradicates all life, leaving no room for moral justification. The Necrons, on the other hand, are guided by ancient ambitions to restore their dominion, often at the expense of other species. Yet some Necron leaders, such as those who safeguard galactic artifacts, occasionally act in ways that preserve knowledge or limit destruction, hinting at a complex moral landscape. The presence of existential threats further complicates these evaluations. The galaxy's harsh realities often force factions to make impossible choices, sacrificing morality for survival. For instance, the Imperium's scorched earth policy during the fall of Agrellan was intended to deny resources to advancing Chaos forces, but led to the deaths of billions. Such events underscore the difficulty of applying moral criteria in a setting where survival often trumps ethics. Ultimately, while these criteria provide a framework for evaluation, they reveal more about the complexity of the Warhammer 40,000 universe than they do about the inherent goodness of any faction. Each faction's actions are shaped by its circumstances, ideologies, and priorities, creating a moral spectrum rather than clear distinctions of good or evil. By examining these moments and motivations, the question of moral goodness becomes less about finding a definitive answer and more about understanding the intricate dynamics at play. Amid the grim realities of the Warhammer 40,000 universe, one faction stands out as embodying a measure of moral goodness within the context of the galaxy's brutal and unforgiving nature. While no faction in this setting can claim to be wholly virtuous, the Salamanders chapter of the Adeptus Astartes emerges as a notable exception, defined by their consistent prioritization of civilian lives and compassion, even in the midst of relentless war. A key decision that exemplifies this moral distinction occurred during the Third War for Armageddon, a pivotal event where the Salamanders' actions set them apart from their peers. The war itself was a catastrophic conflict, driven by the invasion of the Orc warlord Gazkul Thraka, whose vast hordes threatened the vital industrial world of Armageddon. The planet became a critical battleground, drawing forces from across the Imperium to repel the Orc menace. Most factions involved in the conflict, including other Space Marine chapters, viewed the war through a purely strategic lens. Victory was paramount, and sacrifices, both military and civilian, were deemed necessary to achieve it. The Salamanders, however, approached the war with a markedly different perspective. As the Orc assault intensified, the Salamanders faced a decision that would define their role in the conflict. The hive cities of Armageddon, densely populated urban centers, were under siege, and millions of civilians were trapped within their crumbling defenses. Other Imperial forces, prioritizing military objectives, focused on securing strategic points, often leaving civilian populations to fend for themselves or be consumed by the Orc advance. The Salamanders, however, refused to abandon these vulnerable populations. Their leaders made the conscious choice to divert their efforts away from purely tactical goals to focus on protecting and evacuating civilians, even when doing so placed their own forces at greater risk. This decision was not without consequences. By committing their resources to civilian rescue operations, the Salamanders delayed their ability to reinforce critical battlefronts. Their actions drew criticism from more pragmatic factions within the Imperium, who viewed the protection of civilians as secondary to the overall war effort. Yet the Salamanders remained steadfast, driven by their core belief in the sanctity of human life. They organized daring evacuation missions, shielding vulnerable populations from Orc assaults and transporting them to safety. In doing so, they often engaged in brutal, close-quarters combat, taking heavy casualties to ensure the survival of those they sought to protect. One particularly defining moment occurred during the siege of High Volcanus, a sprawling urban center besieged by overwhelming Orc forces. While other Imperial commanders debated whether the Hive was worth the resources required to defend it, the Salamanders made the unilateral decision to intervene. Deploying their forces directly into the heart of the conflict, they fought their way through Orc lines to establish evacuation corridors. Despite being heavily outnumbered, they held these corridors open long enough for tens of thousands of civilians to escape. Their efforts saved countless lives, but came at a significant cost to their own numbers. What sets the Salamanders apart in this context is the motivation behind their actions. Unlike other factions whose decisions are often driven by ideology, strategy, or survival, the Salamanders acted out of genuine compassion and a sense of duty to protect the innocent. This altruistic streak is deeply ingrained in their culture, originating from their homeworld of Nocturne. The harsh environment of the planet fostered a strong sense of community and responsibility among its inhabitants, values that the Salamanders carried into their role as Space Marines. They see themselves not merely as warriors, but as protectors of humanity, and this philosophy shapes their every decision. The impact of their actions during the Third War for Armageddon extended beyond the immediate conflict. Their unwavering commitment to civilian lives inspired hope among the beleaguered populations of the Imperium, offering a rare glimpse of humanity in a universe dominated by despair. Survivors of High Volcanus and other rescued populations spread stories of the Salamanders' heroism, cementing their reputation as defenders of the weak. While their approach was not without its detractors, it underscored the possibility of moral choice even in the darkest of times. Critically, this decision highlights the key qualities that allow the Salamanders to be considered a morally good faction, even if not perfect. Their willingness to prioritize others over themselves, to act with compassion in the face of overwhelming odds, and to remain true to their values, even when pressured to conform to the Imperium's colder pragmatism, sets them apart. In a universe where survival often requires the abandonment of morality, the Salamanders prove that there is still room for altruism and humanity. This moment during the war on Armageddon does not erase the Salamanders' flaws or the broader sins of the Imperium they serve. However, it provides a powerful example of how moral goodness can exist in a setting so defined by its absence. The Salamander's choice to protect the innocent, even at great personal cost, serves as a beacon of hope and a reminder that even in the grim darkness of the far future, the capacity for good remains. The acknowledgement of the Salamanders as a faction embodying moral goodness within the grim darkness of Warhammer 40,000 has far-reaching implications for the galaxy. Though they are a relatively small chapter within the Imperium, their actions and philosophy resonate across multiple levels, influencing both individuals and the broader fabric of the universe. This recognition affects not only how they are perceived by others, but also how the wider Warhammer 40,000 narrative accommodates the rare presence of altruism and humanity amidst relentless war. The immediate impact of identifying the Salamanders as morally good lies in their role as an inspirational symbol for humanity. In a galaxy ruled by fear, oppression, and despair, their reputation for prioritizing the protection of the innocent serves as a counterweight to the Imperium's often brutal and dehumanizing policies. Civilians who survive battles because of Salamander's efforts frequently spread stories of their compassion and heroism. These accounts, passed from planet to planet, create a perception of hope within a setting where such emotions are scarce. For the average citizen of the Imperium, the existence of warriors who value human life over blind obedience to orders challenges the prevailing narrative of sacrifice and ruthlessness. Their actions also influence other Space Marine chapters and military forces within the Imperium. While most of the Adeptus Astartes prioritize victory above all else, the Salamander's consistent focus on minimizing civilian casualties creates a stark contrast. This often draws criticism from more rigid chapters, but it also plants seeds of introspection among their peers. Over time, elements within the Adeptus Astartes and other branches of the Imperium's vast war machine have adopted subtler shifts in their approach, particularly when the Salamander's example has demonstrated the tactical and moral benefits of protecting human lives. On a larger scale, the Salamander's presence disrupts the Imperium's overarching narrative of necessary cruelty. The Imperium's propaganda often portrays its harsh policies as the only means of preserving humanity in a hostile galaxy. The Salamander's choices, however, reveal that it is possible to maintain integrity and compassion without sacrificing effectiveness. Their example challenges the notion that morality and survival are mutually exclusive. This subtle but significant tension creates moments of ideological conflict within the Imperium's hierarchy, especially among those who see the potential for reform versus those who fear change as a threat to stability. Beyond the Imperium, the Salamander's actions occasionally resonate with other factions, particularly those with more pragmatic or cooperative tendencies. The Tau Empire, for instance, may recognize parallels between the Salamander's protective nature and their own stated goals of unity and collective welfare. While the ideological divide between these factions remains vast, moments of shared values, even fleeting, shape the broader narrative of interfaction relations. Similarly, certain alien factions, such as the Eldari, have noted the Salamander's behavior as a rare deviation from the Imperium's typically destructive tendencies, influencing how they engage with humanity in specific contexts. The Salamander's reputation also serves to highlight the moral complexity of the Warhammer 40,000 universe. Their existence emphasizes that not all actions in the setting are dictated solely by pragmatism or desperation. By acting as protectors of the weak and defenders of the innocent, they challenge the otherwise unrelenting grimness of the galaxy. This contrast enriches the narrative, adding layers to the broader story by providing a faction that embodies genuine care for humanity within a deeply flawed system. However, this recognition is not without consequences for the Salamanders themselves. Their commitment to protecting civilians often places them at odds with other Imperial forces, particularly those who view such actions as distractions from the larger war effort. This has led to strained relationships with certain factions within the Imperium, including high-ranking officials who see their methods as inefficient or even subversive. These tensions occasionally result in logistical challenges, such as reduced access to resources or delayed reinforcements, as the Salamanders are deprioritized in larger campaigns due to their unorthodox approach. Despite these challenges, the Salamanders' actions have created ripples that extend far beyond their immediate sphere of influence. Their presence complicates the simplistic narratives of good and evil that dominate much of the Warhammer 40,000 universe. By existing as a faction that upholds a sense of moral responsibility, they force other players in the galaxy to confront the ethical implications of their own decisions. Even among their enemies, the Salamander's reputation elicits moments of hesitation or confusion as adversaries accustomed to ruthless tactics struggle to comprehend a foe that values the lives of non-combatants. In summary, recognizing the Salamanders as a faction embodying moral goodness introduces a dynamic that affects individuals, factions, and the galaxy as a whole. Their influence extends beyond the battlefield, challenging the grim determinism of the Warhammer 40,000 setting and offering a rare example of humanity's potential for compassion and integrity. This acknowledgement not only elevates the Salamanders, but also deepens the narrative complexity of the universe they inhabit. A unique aspect of the question about which faction can be considered truly morally good in Warhammer 40,000 is how deeply it engages fans in debates about morality, pragmatism, and survival. The universe's deliberate embrace of moral ambiguity leaves room for intense speculation, especially when considering which factions might fall on the opposite end of the spectrum, those that represent the absolute worst in terms of ethics and consequences. This duality between identifying the best and the worst factions is a central part of fan discussions and often fuels broader conversations about the themes of the Warhammer 40,000 setting. One of the most frequently discussed aspects of this topic is the cultural and ideological roots of each faction's actions. Fans often highlight how certain factions' guiding philosophies make moral behavior either a possibility or an impossibility. The Salamander's compassion, rooted in their homeworld's communal values, stands in stark contrast to factions like the Drukhari, who are widely regarded as one of the most morally reprehensible groups in the setting. This contrast showcases how intrinsic values shape a faction's capacity for ethical behavior. The Drukhari are often discussed as the antithesis of moral goodness. Their society is built entirely on the exploitation and suffering of others, with no pretense of altruism or collective welfare. Drukhari raiding parties strike without warning, capturing entire populations to fuel their grotesque desires. The suffering of their captives is not an unfortunate byproduct of their goals, but a central pillar of their existence. This deliberate cruelty is compounded by their longevity as they extend their lives through the torment they inflict, creating an endless cycle of suffering. Fans often cite the raid on the human colony of Belial Thafur as a quintessential example of their depravity, where the Drukhari systematically dismantled the planet's defenses, captured its population, and left nothing but ruin. The Tau Empire also sparked significant debate within the community due to their veneer of moral progressiveness. While they preach unity and collective welfare through the greater good, their methods often reveal a more authoritarian side. Forced assimilation of other species, suppression of dissent, and their willingness to sacrifice allies for strategic gains challenge their claim to moral superiority. The Tau's use of propaganda to maintain control over their empire frequently leads fans to question whether their ideals are truly altruistic or merely a sophisticated guise for domination. Another focal point in these discussions is the role of individual choice versus systemic influence. The Chaos factions exemplify this tension, as their followers often begin with seemingly noble intentions before being corrupted by the dark powers of the warp. While the gods of chaos are inherently destructive and manipulative, some fans argue that their followers represent the potential for moral complexity rather than outright evil. For instance, the story of a chaos war band that initially rebelled against the Imperium's tyranny before succumbing to madness is often cited as a case where systemic pressures override personal morality. The Necrons are another faction frequently explored in this context, especially their transition from mortal beings to soulless machines. Their past as a civilization ravaged by disease and betrayed by the Shaitan elicits some sympathy, but their current state as cold, unfeeling conquerors devoid of compassion places them far from any moral consideration. Fans often debate whether their tragic origins excuse their present behavior, or if their loss of individuality renders them incapable of morality altogether. Orcs, while lacking the calculated cruelty of other factions, are often cited as morally neutral rather than good or bad. Their violence is driven not by malice, but by their instinctual nature, creating a peculiar ethical discussion among fans. While their actions lead to widespread destruction, their simplicity and lack of ulterior motives make them a unique outlier in debates about morality. This nuance has led to some humorous fan discussions about whether orcs could be considered innocent in their chaos despite their destructive tendencies. The Imperium of Man consistently occupies a central position in these debates due to its vast scale and contradictions. While it exists to protect humanity from extinction, its methods often involve horrific sacrifices and unrelenting oppression. Fans frequently point to the Imperium's practice of planetary extermination, known as exterminatus, as an example of its moral failings. While justified as a necessary measure to prevent the spread of heresy or alien threats, the wholesale destruction of billions of lives underscores the Imperium's inability to align with any traditional sense of morality. This tension makes the Imperium one of the most polarizing factions in discussions about ethics. Ultimately, fans often conclude that the galaxy's structure makes it nearly impossible for any faction to exist without moral compromises. Even the salamanders, often held up as paragons of virtue, are part of an Imperium that perpetrates countless atrocities. The interconnectedness of factions and their actions ensures that no group can fully escape the grim realities of the Warhammer 40,000 setting. At the same time, this very interconnectedness fuels ongoing debates and keeps the question of moral goodness alive within the community. In this shared conversation, one conclusion tends to emerge. The Warhammer 40,000 universe is designed to reflect the darkest aspects of existence, where morality is rarely rewarded and survival often demands sacrifices that erode ethical ideals. Fans embrace this ambiguity, finding meaning not in definitive answers, but in the endless debates it sparks. This unique interplay between the best and worst factions ensures that the question of moral goodness remains an enduring and thought-provoking element of the setting. The Salamander's status as one of the most morally upright factions in Warhammer 40,000 is closely tied to the character and actions of its most notable individuals. Their leadership and exemplary figures embody the ideals of compassion, resilience, and a sense of duty to protect the innocent. However, even these paragons of virtue are not without flaws, reflecting the complexity of the setting and the challenges they face in upholding their values. One of the most prominent figures in the Salamanders is their chapter master, often described as a warrior philosopher whose leadership is deeply rooted in a commitment to humanity's well-being. His actions consistently demonstrate a rare balance of martial skill and empathy. He is known for personally leading rescue missions, refusing to stand apart from his warriors or the civilians they strive to protect. His character is defined by a deep sense of humility and responsibility, traits that set him apart from many other leaders in the Imperium. However, this same dedication to his ideals can sometimes lead to conflicts with the Imperium's broader goals. By prioritizing humanitarian efforts over strategic objectives, he has drawn criticism from those who view his approach as inefficient or even insubordinate. Another central figure within the Salamanders is one of their most revered captains, who exemplifies the chapter's ideals on the battlefield. Known for his unyielding courage, he often takes on seemingly impossible tasks to ensure the safety of those under his protection. His tactical acumen and inspirational presence have saved countless lives, earning him a reputation as a beacon of hope in even the darkest of battles. Yet, his fierce commitment to protecting others can sometimes lead to overextension, putting his forces at risk to achieve objectives that might seem secondary to other Imperial commanders. This willingness to sacrifice for the greater good, while noble, has occasionally left his company vulnerable to overwhelming odds. A particularly fascinating figure in the Salamanders is one of their chaplains, who acts as both a spiritual guide and a moral compass for the chapter. His role extends beyond the battlefield, as he serves as a bridge between the chapter's traditions and their daily conduct. His sermons and personal guidance inspire his fellow Salamanders to uphold their values even in the face of unimaginable horrors. However, his strong convictions sometimes put him at odds with other Imperial forces, particularly when their orders contradict his sense of justice. This tension has led to moments where he has refused to carry out commands he deems morally wrong, risking censure from higher authorities. The Tech Marines of the Salamanders also play a unique role in embodying their ethos. Unlike the cold detachment often associated with their counterparts in other chapters, these individuals view technology as a means to serve and protect humanity. One notable Tech Marine has earned respect not only for his skill in maintaining the chapter's war gear, but also for his innovative use of technology to aid civilians. Whether designing evacuation vehicles or fortifications to shield the vulnerable, his work often blurs the line between warrior and humanitarian. However, his deep attachment to the tools of his trade can lead to frustration with the Imperium's often wasteful approach to resources, creating friction with other branches of the military. Among the rank-and-file Salamanders, there are numerous sergeants and battle brothers who embody the chapter's ideals through their actions. These individuals, though less prominent than their leaders, contribute to the chapter's reputation through countless small acts of heroism. One sergeant, for example, is known for his unwavering resolve in defending a civilian convoy during an orc assault, holding the line against overwhelming odds until reinforcements arrived. These acts reflect the Salamander's collective character, where even the most junior members are expected to live up to the chapter's high moral standards. Despite their admirable qualities, the Salamanders are not without their flaws. Their deep empathy and commitment to protecting others can sometimes hinder their effectiveness in the Imperium's larger campaigns. Their reluctance to accept collateral damage often puts them at odds with the harsh pragmatism of other Imperial forces. This tension has occasionally led to delays in larger strategic efforts, as the Salamanders refuse to abandon their principles even when it might cost the Imperium a tactical advantage. Their strong sense of community and attachment to their homeworld also creates a vulnerability, as they are more likely to prioritize the defense of Nocturne over other pressing needs. Another potential weakness lies in the Salamanders' limited numbers. Their approach to recruitment and training emphasizes quality over quantity, which means they cannot replenish their losses as quickly as some other chapters. While this ensures that each Salamander is exceptionally skilled and deeply committed to their values, it also means that the chapter cannot always respond to every crisis where their presence might make a difference. Ultimately, the Salamander's most defining characteristic is their ability to maintain a sense of humanity in a universe that often demands its abandonment. Their leaders and warriors consistently act with compassion and integrity, even when it places them at a disadvantage. These qualities make them not only unique among the Space Marines, but also a rare example of moral goodness within the grim darkness of the far future. Yet, their flaws remind us that even the most virtuous factions are not immune to the challenges and compromises of the setting, further enriching the complexity of their narrative. The debate surrounding which faction can be considered truly morally good in Warhammer 40,000 is rife with unresolved questions and theories. While the Salamanders are often highlighted as paragons of compassion, other factions have their supporters who argue for their moral merit, creating a rich tapestry of discussion within the community. These debates touch on the complex intersection of intent, action, and consequence, as well as the difficulty of defining morality in such a bleak and hostile universe. Theories about hidden motives, misunderstood ideologies, and the subjective nature of morality continue to fuel fan discourse. One of the most contentious points centers on the Tau Empire. Many fans argue that the Tau, despite their expansionist policies, represent a vision of progress and cooperation that is rare in the galaxy. The Tau's emphasis on the greater good promotes unity and collective welfare across multiple species, a stark contrast to the brutal xenophobic Imperium. Supporters of the Tau point to their diplomatic efforts to integrate other civilizations peacefully, as seen in their alliances with the Kroot and Vespid. However, critics challenge this narrative, arguing that their use of coercion and propaganda undermines their supposed altruism. Questions remain about whether their ideals are genuinely inclusive or simply a more sophisticated form of authoritarian control. Another unresolved question revolves around the Eldar. Some argue that the craft world Eldar, despite their self-serving tendencies, occasionally act in ways that benefit the galaxy as a whole. Their interventions to thwart chaos, such as closing warp rifts or targeting dangerous artifacts, often prevent catastrophic events that would have widespread repercussions. However, these actions are typically motivated by their own survival rather than altruism. The enigmatic Harlequins, with their role as guardians of the Eldar's cultural and spiritual heritage, also spark debate. Their intricate dances and rituals, which preserve ancient knowledge and warn of future dangers, have led some to view them as moral stewards, albeit ones operating on a plane of logic incomprehensible to most. The Necrons present a particularly interesting puzzle. While their ancient empire and current activities are often brutal, some Necron leaders have displayed behavior that defies easy categorization. Trazyn the Infinite, for example, is known for preserving artifacts, individuals, and even entire populations in stasis, ostensibly to protect them from destruction. While his methods are unquestionably invasive and self-serving, some fans speculate that his motivations may be rooted in a twisted form of preservation. This raises questions about whether morality can exist in the absence of empathy, or whether intent is irrelevant when actions lead to positive outcomes. The Orcs, despite their destructive nature, have also sparked unique discussions. Their lack of malice and their instinctual drive for conflict make them a faction that operates outside traditional moral frameworks. Some fans have humorously suggested that the Orcs, in their simplicity, are the purest faction, as they lack the hypocrisy and ulterior motives present in others. This theory, while not a serious argument for their moral goodness, highlights the challenge of applying human-centric ethics to factions driven by alien instincts or biology. Chaos, as a collective force, is generally seen as the antithesis of morality. However, debates arise around individual Chaos followers who may have been corrupted despite noble intentions. Some argue that the initial rebellion of certain Chaos-aligned forces was driven by legitimate grievances against the Imperium's authoritarian rule. This raises the question of whether these factions would have been different had they not fallen under the influence of the warp. The moral ambiguity of Chaos's origins continues to intrigue fans, as it underscores how even seemingly virtuous actions can lead to disastrous consequences when manipulated by external forces. The Imperium itself remains a subject of intense scrutiny. While the Salamanders embody the best aspects of humanity, the Imperium as a whole represents its darkest. Some fans suggest that the Imperium's oppressive nature is a necessary evil, arguing that its survival strategies, though brutal, are the only way to preserve humanity against existential threats. This utilitarian perspective clashes with the idea that moral goodness should prioritize principles over outcomes. The concept of the Emperor as a divine figure also complicates these discussions. While his intentions for humanity's unity and advancement were noble in the past, his current state as a venerated corpse god has led to a regime that perpetuates suffering and stagnation. The gap between the Emperor's vision and the Imperium's reality leaves fans divided over whether his dream can still be considered a moral framework. Another unresolved question involves the Tyranids. As a biologically driven hive mind, they operate entirely outside moral considerations. Yet their existence raises deeper philosophical questions about morality itself. If a faction acts purely on instinct, without malice or intent, can they be judged as evil? Fans often compare the Tyranids to natural disasters or predatory animals whose actions are destructive but amoral. This line of thought challenges the very premise of the debate, suggesting that morality may not apply universally across the factions. Finally, a significant aspect of this discourse lies in the subjectivity of moral goodness. What one individual or group sees as virtuous, another might view as oppressive or misguided. This relativism is particularly evident in discussions around the factions that claim to act for a greater purpose, such as the Imperium and the Tau. The question of whether ends justify means remains at the heart of these debates, with no clear consensus among fans. These unresolved questions and theories highlight the richness of the Warhammer 40,000 universe and its deliberate resistance to simplistic answers. The ongoing discussions about morality, intent, and consequence keep the setting alive and engaging, allowing each faction to be viewed through a variety of perspectives. This ambiguity ensures that the debate over which faction is truly morally good will remain an enduring and thought-provoking topic for fans. The recognition of a truly morally good faction in the Warhammer 40,000 universe carries profound implications for its long-term narrative and the potential evolution of its factions. Identifying a group like the Salamanders as embodying moral virtues challenges the pervasive grim darkness of the setting, suggesting that even in the bleakest of universes, principles such as compassion and selflessness can endure. This understanding introduces a thread of hope that has the potential to shape the actions of other factions, the stories within the galaxy, and even how fans engage with the universe itself. The acknowledgement of a morally good faction forces a re-evaluation of the motivations and potential of other groups. It suggests that, despite their histories of violence, oppression, or destruction, some factions may have the capacity to evolve into something more ethical. This raises questions about whether groups like the Tau, the Eldar, or even parts of the Imperium might adopt or rediscover values that prioritize the greater good, not just for their own survival, but for the galaxy as a whole. For example, the Tau's philosophy of the greater good, though currently flawed, could potentially mature into a more inclusive and genuinely altruistic system if their leadership became less authoritarian and more cooperative. Similarly, factions within the Imperium might look to the Salamander's example and choose to prioritize humanity's well-being over the preservation of a tyrannical system. On a broader scale, the existence of a morally good faction introduces the possibility of alliances or shifts in the galaxy's dynamics. While the galaxy's history is largely defined by conflict, the recognition of moral actors could inspire collaboration between unlikely factions. The Salamanders' demonstrated willingness to protect the innocent, regardless of species or political affiliation, might lead to partnerships with factions like the Tau or the Eldar in the face of greater existential threats, such as chaos or the Tyranids. These alliances, though rare and fraught with tension, could represent a new chapter in galactic history, where survival no longer demands the abandonment of ethical principles. However, the recognition of moral goodness also raises potential risks and challenges. In a universe built on the premise of endless conflict, factions that act morally are often at a disadvantage. The Salamander's emphasis on protecting civilians and minimizing collateral damage has already made them a target for criticism within the Imperium. If other factions were to adopt similar principles, they might face similar pressures, risking isolation or marginalization in a galaxy that rewards pragmatism and ruthlessness. This tension could lead to fractures within larger factions, as more idealistic groups clash with those who prioritize survival at any cost. There is also the question of whether the galaxy itself is capable of accommodating moral progress. The forces of chaos, the inherent brutality of orcs, and the unrelenting hunger of the Tyranids all represent existential threats that leave little room for ethical consideration. Even if factions like the Tau or the Imperium were to adopt more moral policies, the reality of these threats might force them to abandon those ideals in moments of crisis. This cyclical struggle between ethics and survival ensures that moral goodness, while inspiring, will always be precarious in the Warhammer 40,000 setting. The long-term significance of identifying a morally good faction also lies in what it teaches about the potential for humanity and other species. The Salamander's example suggests that, even within an oppressive system like the Imperium, individuals and groups can choose to uphold principles of compassion and responsibility. This idea resonates beyond the setting itself, offering a philosophical counterpoint to the universe's bleakness. It serves as a reminder that, no matter how dire the circumstances, there is always the potential for ethical choice and action. This message is particularly powerful for fans, who often engage with the setting's moral ambiguity as a reflection of real-world challenges. In terms of whether another faction could surpass the Salamanders in moral standing, it is theoretically possible but unlikely under the current circumstances. For example, the Tau could emerge as a stronger moral force if they were to embrace genuine cooperation and abandon their reliance on propaganda and forceful assimilation. Similarly, certain subgroups within the Eldar or even splinter factions of the Imperium might adopt ethical principles that rival or surpass those of the Salamanders. However, such developments would require significant ideological shifts that seem improbable in the galaxy's current state of perpetual conflict. Ultimately, the recognition of a morally good faction offers a counterpoint to the Warhammer 40,000 universe's dominant themes of despair and survival at all costs. It introduces the possibility that moral ideals can persist even in the face of overwhelming darkness, and that these ideals have the power to inspire change, no matter how incremental. Whether this potential is ever fully realized remains uncertain, but its existence ensures that the debate over morality and ethics will continue to enrich the setting for years to come.